I took some loans.
Oh my God.
In numbers, it might be near about $50,000 to $20,000.
Imagine being physically tethered to your partner by a heavy climbing harness, your hands blistering, muscles burning as you drag their heavy burden up the jagged, steep side of a mountain. Every step is agonizing. Now, imagine that while you are pulling them to safety, you are acutely aware that this person secretly gambled away every single penny of your life savings. They stole your survival. And to make matters so much worse, a devastating, severe illness is quietly multiplying inside your own head, actively impacting your mind, while the man you sacrificed everything for smiles for the cameras. This is not fiction. This is the spectacularly dark, multi-layered collapse of reality television's most controversial couple, an intense case study in deception, biological tragedy, and absolute financial ruin. If you want to dive deep into the harrowing truth behind the glossy reality TV edits, you need to hit that like button right now and subscribe to the channel before we descend into this nightmare. Strip away the reality television filters, the flashy manufactured drama, the quirky background music, and what you are left watching is the terrifying real-time buckling of human sanity. We are looking at a relationship collapsing under the sheer, suffocating weight of deep psychological deception and an utterly devastating medical tragedy. Forget the origins you think you know. Forget the early days of catfishing, the alias Michael Jones, the hidden arranged marriage, and the years of intense familial backlash. We are examining the endgame, the absolute breaking point, the claustrophobic reality of a shattered dream where the bedrock of survival, the money, has completely, terrifyingly vanished. Their joint cafe business has totally collapsed, leaving them trapped inside a single, suffocating room under the roof of incredibly hostile parents. The air in that house is thick with resentment, a daily pressure cooker of cultural isolation. But the true catalyst for this current nightmare, the toxins slowly tainting their every interaction, is a massive, secret financial betrayal. $50,000. The absolute entirety of their joint life savings, the single safety net keeping them from total destitution in a foreign land. Sumit took every single penny of it and lost it all on a friend's phantom investment tip, evaporating their future without saying a single word to the woman sleeping next to him. You might ask why she stays. Why not pack her bags, flee to the airport, and escape this financial trap? But that ignores the paralyzing grip of the sunk cost fallacy. She has invested a decade of her life into this phantom narrative. She alienated her own family, burned her bridges, and now, stripped of her life savings, she completely lacks the financial agency to even purchase a plane ticket home. She is literally, physically trapped in a foreign country with the exact man who gambled her survival away. When a partner destroys your safety net with such callous disregard, extreme psychological manipulation morphs into a daily survival tool. The desperation to reclaim power manifests in bizarre, almost harsh ways. Consider the deeply unsettling sequence that unfolded following a cast banquet, where castmates bragged about raking in cash through online mature pictures. Jenny pivoted into an elaborate, chillingly calculated psychological maneuver. She firmly pressured Sumit onto a bed, demanding he dress down and pose for suggestive photographs to corner a senior citizen market, telling him this humiliating hustle was the only way to pay off the $50,000 he stole from their future. She methodically stripped away his autonomy, treating him like worthless inventory to be auctioned off for pennies. The hustle earned a grand total of $10. $10 for his dignity. He was left entirely deflated, nursing a severely bruised ego, whining to the cameras about looking old and unappealing. But the true darkness of this scene was the twist. She never uploaded the photos. She never created a profile. Reality television producers packaged this as a quirky, goofy wife, teaching her husband a sassy financial lesson. But look closely, and you are staring at a woman with zero financial agency, desperately engineering a scenario to assert absolute dominance over her betrayer. She forced him to taste the exact vulnerability, the suffocating fear of exposure, and the profound helplessness that she drowns in every single day. She turned her marriage into a high-stakes negotiation over a $10 photograph. This manipulation of vulnerability could not be contained to the shadows of their bedroom. When you are hiding $50,000 of missing survival funds, every public interaction is a hidden hazard waiting for a stray footstep. That hazard erupted with spectacular intensity during a heavily documented cast camping trip. Sitting around a crackling campfire, bathed in the orange glow of the flames, a group therapist probed the cast about the burdens weighing on their relationships. Sumit, sensing an audience, immediately slipped into a deeply familiar, meticulously crafted script. He played the tragic victim, loudly complaining about the agonizing, crushing pressure of balancing his traditional parents' conservative expectations against his older wife's relentless needs. He desperately tried to position himself as a noble martyr, sacrificing everything for his family, but he severely underestimated the breaking point of the woman sitting beside him. She snapped. The facade shattered in real time as she dropped a massive, inescapable revelation on the entire cast, revealing to the cameras that her husband didn't actually have an income at all. She revealed that it was her money, their dwindling funds, secretly paying the rent for the very parents who despised her. Cornered by the piercing stares of the group and the undeniable mathematics of his missing $50,000, Sumit was forced to confess to taking out an additional $20,000 in completely secret high-interest loans. There was no remorse, no apology. Instead, his entire demeanor sharply shifted into a bitter, aggressive defensiveness. He began yelling at her right in front of the horrified cast, heavily leaning on cultural obligation to justify his financial disaster. He claimed his actions were a noble, unyielding duty to provide for his traditional parents at all costs, even if it meant entirely financially ruining his wife in the process. He used his culture as a shield for his deceit, spraying a cloud of confusing defensive ink just to escape the blinding spotlight of his own accountability. He miraculously mutated his massive financial betrayal into an act of supreme cultural sacrifice, forcing her to retreat into the darkness of their tent, suddenly acutely aware that she was legally bound to a complete stranger. The visceral irony of this realization manifested the very next morning on the jagged rocks of a mountain trail. Forced into a physical trust-building exercise by the retreat organizers, they were strapped into a heavy climbing harness, bound together by a thick nylon rope. She was physically in front, literally dragging the heavy burden of her husband and his mountain of secret debts up a steep, unforgiving incline, while he trailed behind, pulling the rope tight with silent, burning resentment. It was the most painfully honest, agonizing metaphor ever captured on film. He was constantly pulling the bricks out of their foundation to secretly build a life somewhere else, treating her not as a partner, but as an expendable financial safety net destined to be dragged until she collapsed. To understand why a man would actively pursue a relationship across oceans, only to systematically sabotage it at every conceivable turn, we must transition from the cold, hard mathematics of their bankrupt bank accounts to the suffocating, twisted architecture of his psychological blueprints. The deep, repressed roots of their connection were abruptly unearthed during a high-stakes group intimacy therapy session, a carefully orchestrated environment designed to peel back the layers of public decency. The air in the room was thick, heavy with the nervous anticipation of cornered reality stars. The therapist, probing for vulnerabilities, dropped a seemingly innocent icebreaker into the silence, a conversational pebble meant to ripple gently through the room. Identify your very first celebrity crush. Sitting under the harsh, unforgiving glare of the studio lights, Jenny offered a safe, perfectly calibrated answer for a woman of her generation: Tom Hanks. A standard, unremarkable response that barely registered a ripple in the stifling room, a protective shield of normalcy. But then, the spotlight slowly swiveled to her husband, and the cameras physically zoomed in, capturing the exact, excruciating moment his carefully constructed facade began to rapidly melt. He was visibly sweating. Heavy drops of perspiration began to bead on his forehead, his eyes darting with sudden, unexplainable panic. Instead of naming a contemporary pop star, instead of reaching for a safe, age-appropriate illusion to satisfy the cameras, his mind violently yanked him backward into the darkest, most closely guarded corners of his subconscious. He named a famous, aging Bollywood actress from his own father's generation, a woman who was firmly in her 40s or 50s when he was nothing more than a highly vulnerable, impressionable young boy. The room immediately fell dead silent. You can audibly hear him gasp on camera, the microphone picking up the sharp intake of air as the sheer, terrifying gravity of his own words crashes into his conscious mind. You are watching a man realize, bleeding out in real time on national television, that his attraction to a significantly older woman isn't some random romantic coincidence. It isn't a bold rebellion against his strict, overbearing parents, and it certainly isn't the epic, defiant love story he sold to the world. It is a primal, inescapable drive hardwired into the deepest, darkest circuits of his brain. Panicking under the crushing weight of his own sudden self-awareness, he physically recoils. He looks around the crowded, silent room, his eyes wide like a trapped animal, and he literally begs his own body, out loud, not to become physically aroused on camera. The humiliation is absolute and suffocating. Castmates shift uncomfortably, the silence stretching into pure agony until one finally pierces the tension, explicitly calling him out, diagnosing his erratic, sweating panic as radiating undeniable, chilling pervert vibes. It is a moment of peak, excruciating psychological horror perfectly disguised as reality television awkwardness. But if you zoom out from the sweaty discomfort of that specific room, if you connect the dots buried deep in the historical lore of his family, this grotesque public unmasking unlocks a chilling, long-buried secret that fundamentally obliterates the entire narrative we have been fed for over a decade. Decades ago, in the dim, incense-choked rooms of his childhood, a family astrologer meticulously calculated the charts of this boy's destiny. The seer looked directly into the eyes of a terrified father and delivered a devastating, inescapable prophecy. This specific boy, the astrologer warned, carried a dark fate. His absolute destiny was to cause unprecedented, earth-shattering chaos within the family bloodline by fiercely, relentlessly pursuing a much older woman. This wasn't some cosmic magic or mystical intervention. It was the birth of a devastating psychological virus. Desperate to fight off this looming shadow, his parents spent his entire childhood and adolescence constantly warning him against it. They built towering walls of fear around the concept of older women, endlessly repeating the terrifying prophecy in a futile, desperate attempt to alter his fate. But in doing so, they inadvertently planted the ultimate seed. They watered it with their relentless anxiety, driving the concept so violently deep into his young, malleable subconscious that it mutated into his primary, overwhelming fixation. The forbidden fruit became the only sustenance his mind craved. It became a self-fulfilling psychological framework of destruction, a bomb slowly ticking in his chest until he found the perfect target to detonate it. This singular, horrifying revelation fundamentally flips the entire architecture of their decade-long saga. For 10 agonizing years, the public narrative, the brutal online vitriol, the relentless familial attacks, they all enthusiastically painted the older woman as the manipulative foreign aggressor. She was endlessly cast as the aging Western invader, crossing oceans to aggressively infiltrate a traditional Indian home, selfishly ripping a dutiful, innocent son away from his sacred obligations. She absorbed years of vicious, relentless global hatred for this exact framing. But the suffocating truth unleashed in that therapy room proves she was never the predator. She was the prey. She was the tragic victim of a psychological gravity she could never possibly comprehend. He was always going to do this to someone. If it wasn't her, it would have been another woman, another vessel chosen blindly from the crowd simply to fulfill a dark, hardwired obsession violently planted in his childhood. For the woman sitting frozen in that room, watching her husband frantically beg his body for control, this horrific truth paradoxically provides an indestructible shield. It proves to the entire viewing world that she wasn't just his chaotic midlife crisis or some monumental, isolated mistake. She is the exact, tragic embodiment of his lifelong fixation. He hunted her down across the globe not out of an epic, boundless romance, but to feed a subconscious monster he could not control. We are left staring at the smoldering wreckage of a relationship that is completely, undeniably bankrupt in every conceivable way. It is financially hollowed out by secret debts and stolen savings, emotionally decimated by public humiliation, and held together by nothing more than a twisted psychological gravity and the paralyzing fear of the sunk cost fallacy. It is a spectacularly fragile foundation, a rotting house of cards waiting for a single gust of wind to level it completely to the ground. But just as all these deeply repressed, ugly truths are finally dragged into the blinding light, a devastating, inescapable biological reality strikes from the shadows, poised to completely recontextualize every scream, every outburst, and every tear we just analyzed. Just as the smoldering wreckage of their psychological and financial ruin is dragged into the blinding light, a devastating, inescapable biological reality strikes from the shadows, poised to completely recontextualize every scream, every outburst, and every tear we just analyzed. At 68 years old, trapped in a foreign land with a man who has systematically drained her resources, the woman receives a terminal diagnosis that drops like a guillotine: amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS. It is the exact same brutal, incurable neurodegenerative disease that slowly, agonizingly killed her own father. She is not blind to the horrors of this condition. She knows the precise, terrifying nightmare she is walking into. The signs were already bleeding into the reality television footage, cleverly disguised by producers as the clumsy markers of aging or extreme stress. The cameras unknowingly captured her violently choking on nothing but a sip of water, gagging as her throat muscles began to quietly misfire. They documented her agonizing inability to swallow routine pills, her days hijacked by blinding, paralyzing migraines, and a sudden, heavily slurred speech pattern that the vicious legions of the internet cruelly mistook for a stroke, mocking her failing biology in the comment sections of a heavily edited entertainment show. But there is a critical, devastating medical nuance here that forces us to aggressively reevaluate the entire season of television we just consumed. Throughout the recent episodes, her husband constantly complained to the cameras about her suddenly volatile, unpredictable outbursts. He painted the portrait of a deranged, controlling partner, citing an incident where she allegedly tried to punch him in the middle of a crowded, fluorescent-lit public mall. In another heavily promoted scene, after he publicly mocked her traditional clothing at a caste banquet, she aggressively pointed a sharp fork directly in his face, her eyes wild with uncharacteristic rage. The audience was fed a narrative, complete with dramatic sound effects and quick cuts, framing her as just another toxic, explosive reality TV personality, throwing a tantrum for screen time. But the cold, unyielding reality of neurological science tells a horrifyingly different story. The early onset stages of ALS do not just attack the limbs, they systematically invade and destroy the emotional regulation centers located deep within the frontal lobe of the brain. Long before the disease physically paralyzes the body, it paralyzes a patient's emotional control, creating a documented physiological condition known as pseudobulbar affect. The drastic, uncontrollable mood swings, the blinding, irrational frustration, the sudden flashes of uncharacteristic aggression, these were not the manufactured antics of an orchestrated reality television villain. We were witnessing the tragic, biological cry for help of a woman whose central nervous system was actively failing on global television. She wasn't just fighting her husband over stolen bank transfers. She was fighting a terminal, invisible enemy multiplying inside her own brain, while the man sworn to protect her sat at a dinner table and publicly mocked the symptoms of her impending death. This microscopic biological tragedy violently collides with their monumental financial ruin, creating an insurmountable, suffocating logistical trap. ALS demands an astronomically expensive lifetime of specialized treatments, cutting-edge respiratory machinery, and grueling round-the-clock medical care. But remember, the safety net is gone. The $50,000 she saved to protect her in her twilight years was gambled into dust. They have absolutely nothing. Stranded in India without access to specialized international health insurance, the crushing weight of the mounting medical bills begins to immediately drown them. In a desperate, final bid for survival, they launch a massive online crowdfunding campaign, begging the public for $250,000. They miraculously manage to scrape together nearly $96,000, but the effort is met with a vicious, relentless tidal wave of online backlash. Faceless trolls gleefully accuse the dying woman of exploiting her remaining shreds of fame, labeling her a digital beggar while her motor neurons slowly die. To his absolute credit, her husband temporarily casts aside his bruised ego, fiercely defending her in the digital town square, loudly proclaiming to the cameras that he will beg the entire world to save his wife's life. But the merciless reality of international borders, rigid healthcare systems, and cold geopolitical bureaucracy does not care about crowdfunding campaigns, romantic public defenses, or the ticking clock of a failing human heart. To survive, to access the life-extending Medicare coverage she is legally entitled to, she desperately needs to cross the ocean and return to American soil. But the aggressive progression of the disease has ravaged her body so completely that she is far too weak to endure a multi-leg international flight alone. She requires her husband by her side to physically manage her failing body during the grueling journey, and here is where the trap permanently snaps shut. Her husband is legally barred from stepping foot in the United States, entangled in an impenetrable web of multi-year spousal visa red tape. Her own daughter is forced to frantically board a plane, flying all the way to the suffocating heat of India to forcefully advocate for an emergency humanitarian visa at the sterile, fluorescent-lit U.S. consulate, desperately trying to prove to emotionless government officials that the man who stole her mother's money is now the only irreplaceable caregiver keeping her alive. They are fighting against a ticking clock, unyielding international borders, and a totally depleted bank account. And from the darkest corners of this nightmare, the most recent reports suggest a rumored climax that highlights the brutal, unforgiving sociological reality of extreme caregiver burnout. The pressure of terminal illness, crushing poverty, and total global isolation is proving to be a psychological weight too heavy for a foundation built on deception. The whispers seeping out from their camp are chilling. He is checking out emotionally. Rumors suggest he is quietly preparing to sell their remaining roof, cashing out whatever meager assets they have left, and preparing to file for a divorce. If the whispers hold true, it will be the ultimate, devastating betrayal, leaving a completely paralyzed, terminally ill woman to fight for her last breaths entirely alone in the sterile, beeping room of a private hospital she cannot afford. They survived catfishing, the hidden marriages, and a decade of worldwide hatred, only to have the unforgiving combination of age, biology, and an empty bank account destroy them from the inside out. It is a profound testament to the absolute limits of human passion. Love, no matter how defiantly it screams at the world, simply cannot survive on a rotting foundation of lies and financial deceit when a real-world tragedy strikes. Passion cannot pay the catastrophic bills of a private hospital. A romantic cliché cannot heal a failing nervous system. Did the exact same stubbornness and absolute romantic delusion that allowed them to survive a decade of public hatred actually blind them to the fatal red flags that would ultimately destroy them? Their armor literally became their cage. If you want to survive the algorithm, hack YouTube's audience retention, and continue exploring the darkest, most fascinating corners of human collapse with Tomar Kajarnam, You need to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel right now, and leave a comment below before the reality of this world catches up to you. Stay vigilant, look closely at the foundations of your own life, and we will see you in the next deep dive.